For 6 weeks, Norah's life had been defined by three things: silence, solitude, and the market's indifference. The town square, where the scent of fresh-baked sourdough usually signaled a new day, was instead a stark reminder of her isolation. She would arrange loaves on her wooden table every morning, her hands moving quickly and practiced, but in her eyes there was a profound emptiness, a void nothing to do with her physique, yet everything to do with how the town perceived it. When customers approached, their gaze held a singular, painful truth. Norah was invisible. They would drop coins, snatch the bread, and walk away without a word of thanks or a moment of eye contact. It was a silent agreement, a palpable sensation that followed her everywhere. She was present, but no one saw her. This routine had held for 6 weeks, since her husband died, and since her own baby was born, blue and silent. Every hushed transaction in the market reminded Norah that, while she had already been ostracized for her size, she was now a cursed widow, and avoidance had become the town's unofficial law. The boarding house, where she was tolerated as an act of charity, offered no refuge, the women there seizing every chance to mock her misfortune. Norah's body had become her identity, and that identity, in this society, overshadowed her labor, her decency, and her deep, unacknowledged grief. Have you ever felt like your struggle, not your strength, becomes the only thing people remember about you? But on that particular day, the market's cruel routine shattered. A sharp, desperate cry tore through the usual hum of commerce. It wasn't the sound of a fussy child. It was the wail of a dying baby. The sound was so raw, so loaded with finality, that everyone stopped. It was less a cry and more a gasp of a tiny life clinging to existence. The crowd parted, and a man stumbled into the square. Broad-shouldered, unshaven. His eyes were wild with exhaustion and terror. His shirt was darkly stained, and his hands shook as he held a small bundle. The baby was impossibly small, too still. "For God's sake, someone help!" His voice cracked with a fierce desperation that demanded attention. "She won't eat. It's been 3 days now." Women stepped back instantly. Men looked away, shifting their weight uncomfortably. The man's distress was so complete, so shamefully public, that no one wanted to be near it. "Where's her mother?" someone finally asked. The man's jaw clenched. "She died in childbirth 3 weeks ago." A ripple of gasps spread through the crowd. "I've been to every wet nurse in 3 counties, his voice broke. Every single one refused. Then came the inevitable condemnation. Near the vegetable stand, 2 women whispered loudly enough for Norah to hear. "That's Thomas Hayes, the one who punched the preacher. He was fighting at the saloon last week. I heard his temper is wildfire, and he can't control it. His wife died because no one would help him. The town decided he wasn't worth the trouble." The women turned their backs. Thomas Hayes heard every word. A flash of pure rage crossed his face, and his fist clenched. But then he looked down at his daughter, at her gray skin and shallow breathing, and the anger collapsed into grief. "Please," he whispered, broken. "She's dying. I don't know what else to do." This raw scene of despair was too much to bear. And then Norah's hand stilled on a loaf of bread. Her gaze locked onto that tiny, struggling baby. In that small bundle, she didn't just see a stranger's child. She saw her own silent daughter gone before she'd taken a single breath. Have you ever felt compelled to act, not out of charity, but out of a shared unhealed wound? Old Martha, the herb seller, stepped forward. She pointed across the square at Norah. That one, the widow. She lost her own baby a month back. She might still have milk. Every head turned toward Norah. Thomas Hayes, his heavy boots sounding desperate, crossed the square and stopped in front of her table. Up close, Norah saw the exhaustion carved into his face, the barely suppressed rage and the drowning grief. "Can you nurse her just once, please? I'll pay anything," he pleaded, keeping his voice low against the noise of the crowd. Norah looked at the baby. Before she could answer, loud laughter erupted behind her. It was the three women from the boarding house. The fat widow. You're asking her? She couldn't even keep her own baby alive. Built like that and still lost her child. She's cursed. Maybe she smothered it with all that weight. The market exploded in laughter. Thomas spun toward them, his fist rising in a blur of violence. Norah grabbed his arm, holding him fast. "Don't," he rose, looking down at her. His arm trembled beneath her hand with barely controlled fury. "They're not worth it," she said quietly. Slowly, his fist unclenched. He turned back to Norah. "Will you help?" She looked at the baby, and then at Thomas's desperate eyes. "I live at the boarding house 2 streets over. Bring her there." Relief crashed across his face. "You'll try?" "I'll try." Thomas exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath for days. "Thank you." Behind them, the whispers exploded. "She's taking him to her room. Unmarried, shameless, desperate fat widow, throwing herself at the first man who will look at her." Norah didn't look back. She packed her unsold bread and started walking. Thomas followed close behind. At the boarding house steps, he stopped. "I don't even know your name." "Norah." "Thomas Hayes. Thank you for not turning away." Inside, the boarding house girls watched from the kitchen doorway. Norah led Thomas up the narrow stairs to her attic room. Whispers followed. "Give it an hour. He'll come back down alone. The baby will probably die anyway." Norah closed the door. Her room was small. A single bed, a wooden chair, a cracked mirror. Thomas stood in the center, looking lost. "Sit," Norah said quietly. She took the chair. Thomas knelt beside her. Carefully, Norah took the baby. So light, too light. The baby's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. Norah unbuttoned her dress and brought the baby to her breast. At first, nothing happened. Her milk had almost dried up. The baby's mouth moved weakly, trying, failing. "Come on," Norah whispered. "Please try." Then finally, she latched and drank. Thomas made a sound, half sob, half gasp. "She's drinking. Oh, God, she's drinking." Tears streamed down his face, unwiped. Norah's own tears fell silently. For 3 weeks, her body had made milk for a baby who would never drink it. Now a baby was alive because of her. Thomas sank to the floor beside the chair, his shoulders shaking. "I thought I'd lost her, like I lost Sarah. I thought God was taking everything." Norah said nothing. She just rocked, letting the baby drink. Outside, the sun moved across the sky. Inside, 3 broken people found their first moment of peace. When the baby finally stopped, her color had changed. Pink instead of gray, her breathing deeper. Thomas looked up at Norah. "You saved her life." Norah handed the baby back carefully. "She'll need to eat again in a few hours. Can I bring her back?" Norah hesitated. The matron would be furious. The girls would mock her relentlessly. But the baby was alive. "Yes." Thomas stood, cradling his daughter. "I'll come back before sunset." He paused at the door. "They were wrong about you. The women at the market. You're not cursed." Norah looked down. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because my daughter is alive. And that's not a curse. That's a miracle." He left. Norah sat alone. Outside, the laughter and gossip continued, waiting for her failure. But for the first time in 6 weeks, Norah didn't feel powerless. She'd saved a life today. And tomorrow Thomas Hayes would come back, not because he had to, but because he needed her. Thomas returned at sunset. The boarding house girls scattered to watch from the shadows as Norah answered. "She's hungry again," he said. Norah ignored the watching eyes. "Come in." The whispers started immediately. "Second time today. She's practically throwing herself at him." Norah led Thomas upstairs. In her room, she nursed the baby while Thomas sat on the floor. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly. Norah looked up. "Come to my ranch just for a few weeks until she's stronger. I'll pay you proper wages, give you your own room." Norah's hands stilled. Thomas confessed his desperation. "I can't do this alone anymore. I need help, not just with her, with everything." Norah knew the town would talk, but Thomas's resolve was absolute. "My wife died because this town decided I wasn't worth helping. They can think whatever they want. I'm asking you. Will you come?" Norah thought of the loneliness. "I'll come." Thomas sagged with relief. "Thank you." The very next morning, before the sun had fully lifted the market's chill, Norah packed her small satchel. One extra dress, her mother's hairbrush, a well-worn Bible. She had nothing else of value, yet she felt richer than she had in 6 long, lonely weeks. As she descended the narrow, creaking stairs, the silence was almost immediately replaced by the low, venomous hum of the boarding house girls. They lined the hallway, their eyes sharp, ready to witness her final, inevitable humiliation. "Going to play house with the angry rancher?" one scoffed, loud enough for the whole hallway to hear. "He'll send you back within a week. Fat girls always get sent back." The cruelty wasn't just in the words, but in the certainty of their delivery. They truly believed her failure was a guarantee. This is how society works, isn't it? It assigns you a role based on a shallow judgment, and then waits, sometimes actively works for you to fail that role. The matron emerged from the kitchen, her face a mask of avarice. "You're leaving, then?" "Yes, ma'am." "You owe 3 months' room and board. $50. Norah's stomach dropped. In her frantic rush to embrace this impossible chance, she had forgotten the practical, brutal reality of debt. "I'll pay it when I can." The matron's eyes gleamed with anticipated control. "You'll pay it now or you'll stay until it's worked off." A prison disguised as charity. Just then, Thomas appeared in the doorway. The baby, wrapped tightly, cradled in his arms. He didn't even have to ask what was happening. The atmosphere of cheap malice spoke for itself. "How much does she owe?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous, silencing the girls. The matron, momentarily stunned by his sudden authority, stuttered, $50. Without hesitation, Thomas pulled out his wallet, leather-worn and scarred like himself, and counted bills. 60. That covers her debt and compensates you for the inconvenience." The matron stared at the extra $10, caught between shock and greed. Thomas didn't wait for her response. He turned to Norah, his gaze firm and direct. "You're free. Let's go." Outside, a dusty wagon waited. Thomas helped Norah up, then in a profound gesture of trust, handed her the tiny, precious bundle of his daughter before climbing up himself. As they rolled away, Norah heard the girls' voices, fading behind them. Did he just pay her debt? $60 for her? Maybe he really is desperate. Even in their defeat, they couldn't allow Norah a win. They had to diminish her worth by attributing Thomas's kindness to his own desperation. The ride through town was a parade of pointed fingers and whispered condemnations. Norah kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. "They're going to make your life difficult," she said quietly. Thomas's jaw tightened. They already did. The day they let my wife die. His voice was iron. They rode in silence until they were well out of the town's immediate reach. The ranch isn't much, he warned. It's messy. I haven't had time to keep up with things. I can help with that, Norah offered immediately. He glanced at her, a hint of confusion in his exhausted eyes. I'm hiring you to nurse Grace, not clean my house. I know, Norah said, down at the sleeping baby, but I need to feel useful for more than just my body. That quiet confession hit Thomas with the force of a blow. He nodded slowly, a depth of understanding passing between them. He saw the wound the town had inflicted, that her physical self was deemed insufficient, and therefore her entire being was worthless. He understood that she needed to reclaim her identity through her competence. The ranch appeared over the hill, bigger than Norah expected, with a sturdy barn and a solid house. But as they got closer, the details betrayed the neglect. Laundry piled high on the porch, a garden choked with weeds, chickens running loose. The ranch, like its owner, was dying slowly from a lack of care. Inside was chaos. Dishes stacked, dust everywhere, baby things scattered. But Norah saw the strong bones of the house, the big windows, the potential for warmth. Thomas showed her to her room, the hired hand's small room off the kitchen. It has a lock on the inside, he specified, a quiet acknowledgement of the need for safety and boundaries. It's perfect, Norah whispered. That evening, after nursing Grace until the baby's eyelids fluttered heavily, Norah couldn't help herself. She washed the dishes. She swept the floors. She started folding the mountain of laundry. Thomas came in from feeding the horses and stopped, framed in the doorway, watching her. You didn't have to do that. I know. I hired you for Grace, Norah kept folding. I need to work. It's the only thing that keeps me from thinking about my daughter. This time the grief was a shared language. Thomas didn't argue. He picked up a rag and started drying the dishes beside her. They worked in silence side by side. When the kitchen was clean, Thomas made coffee, setting a cup in front of Norah without asking. You're good at this, he said quietly, taking care of things. My mother taught me before she died, Norah replied. And your husband? Norah's hand stilled on her coffee cup. He taught me that not all men are kind. Thomas went quiet. I'm sorry. It's over now. He's gone. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Grace slept soundly in her cradle between them. For the first time since Sarah died, Thomas's house didn't feel empty. And for the first time since her baby died, Norah felt like she belonged somewhere. Outside, the ranch settled into evening quiet. Inside, two broken people began the slow, arduous work of finding their way back to a life worth living. They had moved from a place of public shame to a shared sanctuary, a miracle bought with $60 and a desperate plea. 2 weeks passed, and Grace thrived. Her cheeks began to fill out. Her tiny cries grew stronger, demanding attention, demanding life. She gained weight every day, a visible, undeniable miracle witnessed by Norah and Thomas. But Norah's attention wasn't confined to the cradle. She noticed everything else, too. The slow decay of the ranch was a reflection of Thomas's untreated grief, and Norah found a desperate kind of therapy in fixing it. The chicken coop was a disaster. Broken nesting boxes, rotting straw. The hens were scattered, stressed, and barely laying. The garden was completely overgrown. Weeds strangling out every useful plant Thomas had tried to coax from the soil. The north pasture fence sagged dangerously. The barn roof leaked, ruining good hay. Thomas worked from dawn until dusk, but he was one man carrying the weight of two people's work and the mental load of a broken heart. It was a truth often overlooked. Grief is a form of paralysis, and it infects everything you touch. One morning, after nursing Grace, Norah couldn't bear the chaos any longer. She found tools in the barn, a hammer, some spare wood, a broom, and walked straight to the chicken coop. It was a disgusting, frustrating mess, but she got to work. 2 hours later, Thomas came looking for her. He stopped dead in his tracks. Norah was covered in dirt and feathers, sweat plastering strands of hair to her forehead, a hammer clenched in her hand. The coop was swept clean, fresh straw laid down, and she was hammering new slats into place. The hens, already calmer, were settling back into their newly repaired boxes. "What are you doing?" Thomas asked, his voice rough with surprise. "Fixing your coop," she said without pausing her rhythmic hammering. "I know you were going to get to that. But you're one person doing the work of three, and I'm here and I know how to work." She drove another nail home with two powerful, precise strikes. Thomas watched her finish the last repair, his astonishment turning into something like reluctant admiration. "Where did you learn carpentry?" "My father taught me before he died," she answered, standing up and dusting the grime off her dress. "Before I married a man who told me women shouldn't touch tools." She met his eye, her gaze steady. "I'm not helpless, Thomas. Just because I'm big doesn't mean I'm useless." That line hung in the air, a challenge, a truth, and a defense all at once. Thomas stepped closer, the space between them suddenly crackling with unspoken realization. "I never thought you were useless," he said, his voice quiet, sincere. "The hens would lay again now," Norah said, her voice softer now, pulling back from the intensity of the moment. "You'll have eggs by tomorrow." She started to walk past him, but his hand caught her wrist. It was a gentle touch, not controlling, a question more than a demand. Norah froze. His hand, scarred and strong, rested on her skin. "Norah," he repeated, "you don't owe me this work." "I know." "Then why?" She looked at his hand on her wrist. "Because for the first time in my life," her voice caught slightly, exposing the fragile honesty beneath her tough exterior, "someone needs me for more than just my body. You need me because I work, because I'm capable, because you see me." Thomas's grip loosened, but his hand stayed. "I do see you." They stood like that for a long moment, the world narrowing to the dusty yard, the repaired coop, and the profound vulnerability of their connection. The moment broke only when Grace's cry sounded from the house. "I'll get her," Thomas muttered, releasing her wrist. Norah watched him walk away, her heart pounding a furious, hopeful rhythm. The next day she tackled the garden. She was on her knees pulling weeds when two men rode up, ranch hands Thomas had hired to repair fences. They dismounted and walked toward Thomas by the barn. Norah kept working, but their voices carried on the wind. "Got yourself some help, boss?" "I do." "She's a big woman. Bet she eats more than she's worth." Laughter followed. Thomas went instantly, terrifyingly still. "What did you say?" The laughter died. "Nothing, boss, just making conversation." "Making conversation about the woman who saved my daughter's life?" Thomas's voice dropped to a level of deadly calm that was worse than any shout. "Get off my land, now." The men scrambled for excuses, trying to claim it was just a joke, but Thomas stepped closer, his rage barely contained. "You insult her on my land, you answer to me. Don't come back." The men, recognizing the genuine threat in his eyes, mounted their horses and rode off. Norah stood slowly, her hands shaking, not from fear but from the shock of being defended. He defended her again. That evening, Grace spit milk onto Norah's only good dress. "I'll help you clean it," Thomas offered, retrieving one of Sarah's old dresses for Norah to wear while hers dried. They worked together at the wash basin, their hands moving over the soapy fabric, their fingers brushed. A simple, inevitable contact, and both froze. Neither pulled away. Thomas's thumb brushed across her knuckles, slow and deliberate. "Norah," he started. "Yes," she whispered, looking up. But before he could speak, Grace started crying from her cradle, the practical demands of life shattering the intimate moment. Thomas stepped back immediately. "I should get her." Later that night, Norah sat on the porch steps, unable to sleep. The door opened and Thomas sat down beside her, close enough that she felt his warmth. "Can't sleep? Too much on my mind." They sat in comfortable silence, looking at the distant, uncaring stars. "My wife died hating me," Thomas said suddenly, the confession tearing through the quiet. Norah turned to him. "Not really hating me, but she died scared. The midwife wouldn't come because I'd gotten into a fight with the preacher. He'd said something cruel about Sarah, and I lost my temper and hit him. So when Sarah went into labor, nobody would come. I held her hand, and I couldn't do anything. When Grace finally came, Sarah was already gone." He stared at his hands. "Sometimes I think she blamed me in those last moments, for my anger, for making this town hate us enough to let her die." Norah took his hand without thinking. "You didn't kill her. This town did." "You didn't kill her? This town did. I should have controlled my temper." Norah squeezed his hand. "And the preacher should have controlled his cruelty. You're not the villain, Thomas." Silence settled between them, a deep, comfortable quiet that allowed them to breathe in the vast, uncaring dark. Thomas's confession had been a wound. Hers was a scar. "My husband didn't die in an accident," Norah said quietly, staring at the stars. Thomas turned his face toward her. "He was drunk. Beat his horse because it wouldn't move fast enough. The horse kicked him in the head. Everyone called it a tragedy, but I knew the truth. He beat that horse the same way he beat me." Her voice was steady now, fortified by years of buried pain. "Our baby was born a month after he died, born silent, blue, the cord was wrapped around her neck. The midwife said it just happens. But I wondered if all the times he hit me while I was pregnant damaged something inside. I thought maybe I was the curse they all called me." Thomas turned her face toward him gently, his scarred thumb brushing her cheek. "You didn't kill your baby. Fate did, but not you. How can you know? Because you saved mine." The words broke something open inside her. The tears that had refused to fall for weeks, tears for her lost child, tears for the shame, tears for the isolation, came now. They were not tears of weakness, but of release. They sat like that until the stars began to fade, two broken people learning that they could be whole again together. They had moved from strangers bound by necessity to allies bound by shared ugly truths. The deepest connections are forged not in joy, but in surviving the worst of life and finding someone who understands the cost. 3 weeks had passed since Norah came to the ranch. Grace was thriving. Pink-cheeked, strong lungs, grabbing at everything with tiny, insistent fists. The ranch had transformed under Norah's quiet, competent care. The garden was producing vegetables. The chickens were laying daily. Fences stood strong. The house was warm and clean. Everything looked better. Thomas had peace, but the town had gossip. One afternoon, 3 women from town rode up in a carriage. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, the preacher's wife, and another woman Norah didn't recognize. Thomas was out checking the far fence line. Norah was in the garden, a picture of domestic industry, when they arrived. Miss Norah, Mrs. Henderson called out sweetly, too sweetly, the way a predator talks to its prey. "We've come to speak with Mr. Hayes." "Is he here?" "He's working the north pasture." "Pity." The preacher's wife stepped forward, her face a mask of false piety. "We came to warn him, actually, about you." Norah's stomach tightened. She knew this script by heart. The whole town is talking. An unmarried woman living alone with a man. It's sinful, shameful. "I have my own room," Norah said quietly, maintaining her dignity. "That doesn't matter. Appearances matter. And this appears very wrong. We're here to take you back to the boarding house. For everyone's sake, before you ruin what's left of his reputation." "I'm not going back. You don't have a choice. You still owe." "Thomas paid my debt. You know that." "Then you're living here as his mistress," the preacher's wife spat, using the word like a physical slap. "Which makes you a—" Before the word could land, hoofbeats thundered up the road. The two ranch hands Thomas had fired 3 weeks ago appeared. Both were drunk, both angry, and both reined their horses near the garden, swaying in their saddles. "Well, well," one of them slurred, eyes fixed on Norah. "The fat got company." The town women gasped and instinctively stepped back toward their carriage. Norah's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "You need to leave. Thomas fired you." "Thomas ain't here, though, is he?" The man dismounted, stumbling slightly. "Just you all alone. We came for what we're owed. Boss fired us over you. Cost us wages." "I'll pay you to leave," Norah said, backing slowly toward the house. "We don't want money." The first man grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "We want compensation." He lunged for her. Norah screamed. The man grabbed her arm, his grip brutal, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Let go of me." "Not until we get what's owed." A gunshot cracked through the air. Everyone froze. Thomas stood 20 feet away, rifle raised, his eyes wild with a terrifying, protective rage. "Get your hands off her." The ranch hand instantly released Norah. "Hands up! We were just talking, boss." "You touched her." Thomas's voice was deadly calm, more terrifying than a shout. "You put your filthy hands on her." He advanced slowly, the rifle still aimed. "I told you never to come back here. I told you what would happen." "Thomas, we were just—" "Get on your horses right now. If I ever see either of you on my land again, I won't fire a warning shot." His finger moved to the trigger. "I'll aim for your hearts." The men scrambled onto their horses and rode off fast. Thomas lowered the rifle slowly, his hands shaking. The town women stood frozen by their carriage. Thomas turned to them, his face a mask of cold fury. "You brought them here." "We didn't know they'd—" Mrs. Henderson stammered. "You came here to take her away, to humiliate her. And while you were calling her names, those men came to hurt her." His voice rose with righteous indignation. "Get off my land, all of you, now." The women scrambled into their carriage and fled. Silence fell over the ranch. Thomas dropped the rifle and crossed to Norah in 3 long strides. "Are you hurt? Did they—" "I'm fine. You came in time." She grabbed his wrists. "I'm all right." He pulled her against his chest, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "When I heard you scream," his voice broke, "I thought I'd lost you, like I lost Sarah. I'm here. I'm safe." They stood like that for a long moment, his heart pounding against her ear. Finally, Thomas pulled back just enough to look at her. "I can't do this anymore." Norah's breath caught. "What? Pretending you're just a worker? Pretending I don't need you more than air?" His thumb brushed her cheek, gently wiping away a tear she didn't know she'd cried. "I love you, Norah. I'm in love with you, and I can't keep hiding it." Tears spilled down her face. "I love you, too." "Then marry me," Thomas said, his voice firm, resolute. "Not someday. Tomorrow. Before anything else can happen. Before anyone else can try to take you away." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Thomas kissed her, a claiming, desperate kiss, like a man who had been holding back weeks of emotion, and finally broke. Dawn broke cold and clear over the ranch. The air was charged not with fear, but with an intense, quiet determination. Thomas hitched the wagon before sunrise. Norah sat beside him, Grace bundled securely in her arms. The baby, pink and healthy, was the living evidence of their defiance. "Nervous?" Thomas asked, glancing at her. "Terrified," Norah admitted, but she didn't look away from the road ahead. He took her hand, his palm rough and solid against hers. "Me too. But remember this. We decide our own worth now, not them." They rode into town as the church bells rang for Sunday service. It was the perfect, calculated timing. The streets were full. People everywhere, dressed in their Sunday best, were gathering in the square after the morning sermon. Thomas's wagon rolled to a stop directly in front of the courthouse. Conversations died instantly. Heads turned as one, drawn by the irresistible spectacle. The angry rancher and the fat widow together. Whispers erupted like wildfire, frantic and judgmental. Thomas helped Norah down, his hand firm on her back, guiding her. They walked toward the courthouse steps where the circuit judge held weekend hours, the crowd parting, staring openly, hungry for scandal. Then a voice rang out, sharp and official. "Thomas Hayes." Sheriff Patterson pushed through the crowd, the boarding house matron hovering smugly beside him. Thomas turned slowly, his face calm but unyielding. "Sheriff?" "Mrs. Henderson filed a complaint," the sheriff stated, holding a paper. "Says you're keeping Miss Norah against her will, living in sin." The crowd pressed closer, savoring the drama. Thomas's voice was dangerously steady. "Norah is here by choice." "Doesn't matter," the sheriff replied, reciting the local statute. "Unmarried people living together breaks town ordinance. Marry her right now or I enforce the complaint." Thomas turned to Norah, a flicker of a genuine smile touching his lips. "That was the plan anyway." She nodded, her heart hammering not from fear, but from the magnitude of the moment. Right now. They climbed the courthouse steps together. The judge stood in the doorway, observing the spectacle with weary professionalism. "You want to marry now?" "Right now," Thomas said, his voice ringing out over the silent square. "This is absurd," the matron sputtered, seeing her control slip away. "A forced marriage." "Nobody is forcing me," Norah said clearly, turning to face the crowd, her voice strong despite the pounding in her chest. "I choose him." It was a declaration of self-possession more powerful than any sermon. The judge pulled out his book. Witnesses. Old Martha, the herb seller, the one who first pointed Norah out, pushed forward. "I'll witness." The blacksmith stepped up. "Me as well." The judge opened his book. "Thomas Hayes, do you take this woman as your wife?" "I do." "Norah, do you take this man as your husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." He snapped the book shut. "Kiss your bride." Thomas cupped Norah's face and kissed her right there on the courthouse steps. It was a kiss of defiance, of ownership, and of undeniable love. The crowd erupted in shocked gasps, their rigid conventions shattered by the public display. When Thomas pulled back, he turned to face everyone, his arm securely around Norah. "She's my wife now, legally. Anyone got a problem with that?" Silence. Then the matron spoke, her spite the last defense of a defeated bully. "This doesn't change what she is." "Careful," Thomas cut her off, his voice deadly calm. "You're talking about my wife." The matron's face was scarlet. "The town knows she trapped you." Thomas's voice rang out, clear and powerful, silencing all dissenting whispers. "She saved my daughter when every one of you refused. She saved my ranch. She saved me when I wanted to die from grief." He pulled Norah closer, an act of unshakable public devotion. "So yes, she's in my house, my life, my heart, and I'm damn proud of that." One of the boarding house girls called out, bitter to the end, "You'll regret this." Thomas stared directly at her, his voice steeped in a sad final wisdom. "The only thing I regret is that you'll never know what it's like to be loved the way I love my wife." He turned to the sheriff. "We done?" Patterson nodded, completely subdued. "You're married. Complaint dismissed." Thomas helped Norah into the wagon. As they started to leave, he stopped once more, standing in the seat so everyone could see his final warning. "One more thing. Anyone who insults my wife insults me. Anyone who threatens her threatens my family. And I protect my family." His voice was still, final, and absolute. "Remember that." Then he drove away. The ride home was quiet, filled only with the solid rhythm of the wagon wheels. Thomas's hand found Norah's and covered it completely. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly. She looked at him, tears of relief and deep, earned joy running down her face. "What?" "Just wanted to say it." She smiled through her tears. "I like the sound of that." Back at the ranch, the sun was setting, painting everything gold. Thomas lifted Norah down, then took Grace from her arms. They stood on the porch, watching the sky change colors. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. Norah looked at him, this man broken by grief who had learned to love again, who had chosen her when the world said she wasn't worth choosing. "I'm happy." Thomas shifted Grace to one arm and pulled Norah close, securing his family. "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." Grace stirred contentedly. "She's beautiful," Norah whispered, "like her mother." Thomas kissed Norah's forehead, both of them. Inside the house was warm, dinner waiting, a fire crackling. Outside, the ranch thrived. Two broken people had found wholeness in each other. A dying baby had found life. An angry man had found peace. A shamed woman had found worth. Together, they had built something the town couldn't destroy, a family. As stars appeared, they sat on the porch with Grace between them. Thomas took Norah's hand. "We saved each other." Norah leaned against him. "We did." They sat in silence as darkness fell. Two people the world said weren't enough, who found each other and discovered they were everything. The ride home was quiet, a comfortable silence woven with the profound emotion of the morning. Thomas's hand was warm and heavy over Norah's, a constant, grounding presence. He glanced at her, a look that held all the gratitude, all the grief, and all the love that had brought them to this moment. "Mrs. Hayes," he said again, testing the sound, letting it settle between them like a promise. Norah just smiled. She loved the sound, too. It was the sound of belonging. They pulled the wagon up to the ranch as the last streaks of sunset painted the western sky. The ranch was no longer a symbol of neglect. It was a home. Thomas lifted Norah down, then carefully took Grace from her arms. They stood on the porch, watching the gold and rose fade to deep twilight. "Are you happy, Norah?" Thomas asked quietly, his eyes on the horizon. He needed to know that the fight, the risk, the defiance of the town was worth it for her peace. Norah looked at him, this man who had been broken by his own righteous anger and unbearable loss, this man who had chosen her, the shunned woman, in front of the entire town when the world said she wasn't worth choosing. She saw the integrity in his eyes, the strength that was now tempered with tenderness. "I'm happy," she confirmed, the word ringing true and complete. Thomas shifted Grace to one arm and pulled Norah close, the physical weight of his body a solid reassurance. "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." Grace stirred in his arms, her cheeks now plump and pink. "She's beautiful," Norah whispered, brushing a tiny curl from this baby's forehead, like her mother. Thomas kissed Norah's forehead, both of them. They went inside. The house welcomed them with the warmth and cleanliness Norah had created. Dinner was waiting, simple, nourishing, a testament to her care. They sat by the stone fireplace, its gentle crackle a soothing rhythm after the day's drama. Grace slept soundly in the cradle between them. The angry man had found peace. The shamed woman had found worth. The dying baby had found life. They had moved beyond survival and into thriving. Together they had built something the town could not touch and could not destroy: a family. As the stars appeared, Thomas took Norah's hand, his fingers tracing the familiar lines of her palm. "We saved each other." Norah leaned her head against his shoulder. "We did." They sat in silence as darkness fell. Two people the world had cast out, who found each other and discovered that they were, in fact, everything. The world outside was judging, but inside their walls, under the starlight, their life was just beginning. True strength isn't found in avoiding judgment, but in choosing who you stand with. If this story of Norah and Thomas taught you anything, it's that true worth is never found in the crowd's whispers, but in the courage to choose love. Don't let the algorithms decide what stories matter. If you believe in second chances, grit, and the kind of fierce, loyal love that defies a whole town, then hit that subscribe button and join the True Western Stories family.